Imagine that a single sentence, said with a smirk, can break a life, or save it forever. That thought seemed to hang in the air long before anyone knew why. Morning court shuffled along like an old song everyone half remembered. Benches creaked, people whispered about fines and missed shifts. Someone tapped a restless rhythm with a shoe against the floor. The air smelled of polish on worn wood, printer ink, and the coffee an officer had forgotten on a side table. Then the side door opened, and the whole room tilted. He walked in like he'd taken a wrong turn into the wrong building. Mid-20s, tall, lean in that carefully underfed way. Perfectly fitted black jacket, crisp white t-shirt that had never seen a laundromat, sneakers that cost more than most cars in the lot outside. His hair looked as if a stylist had accidentally made it flawless. Hands in his pockets, shoulders loose, chin slightly lifted, not curious, not nervous. Bored. The clerk called the next case. Jaden Lockwood. A soft murmur rippled through the benches at the sound of the last name. Lockwood. People read that name on the bottom of news channels, on streaming platforms, at the end of talk shows. Most in the room had been sure, wherever that kid was, he'd walk in flanked by lawyers and a father who owned half the city. Instead, Jaden stepped to the podium alone, barely glancing at the seal on the wall or the flag beside it. Judge Caprio watched him with the same calm he gave to everyone, from the nervous grandmother with a parking ticket to the construction worker who forgot his registration. His hands rested neatly on the bench. His eyes, though, sharpened a little. "Good morning," he said. Jaden rolled one shoulder, as if brushing off dust. "Let's get this over with. I don't have time for this." Someone in the third row puffed out an incredulous breath. Another shook his head, half amusement, half disgust. The clerk began to read. "You are charged with speeding in a residential area, disregarding a red light, and failing to respond to multiple notices." Jaden cut in without even turning his head fully toward the bench. "You want my name first, right? Protocol and all that." Caprio inclined his chin. "State your full name for the record." "Jaden Alexander Lockwood," he said. Then, with a faint curl of his lip, "You probably can't pronounce it anyway." The room answered before the judge could. A low explosion of whispers. A short, stunned laugh from the back. Someone hissed under their breath. "I can't believe he just said that to Caprio." The wooden benches, freshly waxed, seemed to exhale the faint scent of cleanser and tension together. The courtroom felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in a few inches. Caprio didn't flinch. One eyebrow rose, the kind of movement you'd miss if you weren't watching closely. His voice stayed level. "I read quite well, Mr. Lockwood," he said. "And I assure you, I can manage 4 syllables." For the first time, Jaden really looked at him. Not fully. He stood half-turned, shoulder angled toward the judge, as if this were staff he was speaking to, not a court. Hands still buried in his pockets, chin tilted with the easy arrogance of someone who'd never been told no and meant it. "Fine," he said. "Read whatever you need to read." Caprio returned to the file. "You were recorded traveling 27 miles over the limit in a posted neighborhood zone and entering an intersection on a steady red. Would you like to explain that?" Jaden gave a short, humorless breath, more exhale than laugh. "The car basically drives itself," he said. "If it sped, it sped. Not my problem." A sharp intake of breath moved through the gallery like a wave. A woman clutched her purse tighter. An older man muttered, "That's supposed to be a joke?" Caprio's fingers rested on the edge of the folder, motionless. "Not your problem," he repeated quietly. "You were in the driver's seat, were you not?" Jaden shrugged without removing his hands from his pockets. "I was in the seat, sure. But you know how these things are now. The tech runs it. Lane assist, adaptive cruise, collision whatever. It knows more than I do. If it wanted to go a little faster, it went. I didn't program the thing." He said it with a cool, almost icy certainty that made the difference in the room clear. On one side, people who worried about insurance, rent, and gas. On the other, a young man who spoke of a car like an appliance that came with servants. Caprio studied him, eyes slightly narrowed, not unkind, but intent. Somewhere behind that calm gaze, a question was taking shape. Was this just another spoiled driver brushing off a ticket? Or was there something else hiding under that metallic voice and hands jammed deep in pockets? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Caprio closed the file halfway and looked over the rim of his glasses. Mr. Lockwood, he said, we can talk about engineering later. Right now, I'd like you to talk about you. Tell me something about yourself. Jaden's jaw tensed. He rolled his eyes, slow and deliberate. I'm fine, he said. That's all you need to know. A couple of people in the front row exchanged glances, one amused, one tired. Caprio didn't lecture. He simply tilted his head, as if considering a puzzle. People who say that, he replied, usually have the most to tell. A small chuckle escaped someone in the back. It wasn't directed at Jaden so much as in quiet support of the older man on the bench who'd clearly heard just about everything. Jaden shifted his weight, sneakers squeaking faintly against the floor. What do you want, my resume? He asked. You already read my name. That usually tells people enough. Humor me, Caprio said. Where do you live? In a building downtown, Jaden answered. Top floors. On your own. He hesitated, just a second too long. With my father, he added, as if the word tasted sour. Technically, it's his penthouse. I use part of it. So you're independent, Caprio said mildly. In your father's home. A faint snicker rippled through the gallery. Jaden's cheeks colored, a quick, angry flush. I make my own choices, he snapped. I'm not some little kid. Life's easy if you're smart about it. Are you in school? The judge asked. I was, Jaden replied. Twice. College is optional. You left? They said dismissed. His mouth twisted into something like a smile, but his eyes didn't follow. Wrong fit. Both times. The contrast hung there. Life is easy if you're smart, versus two expulsions he couldn't quite disguise. On the podium, his phone lit up. The bright screen drew every eye around it. Across the top, Dad, in all caps. Below, a neat stack of missed calls, lined up like little accusations. 10, maybe more. The device buzzed again, insistent. Jaden flipped it over with a flick of his fingers, face down on the wood. He knows I hate courtrooms, he muttered, almost to himself. Somebody in the second row whispered, courtrooms? Plural? Another quietly said, so this isn't his first ride. The word stuck in the air. Not courtroom, courtrooms. A habit, not an exception. Caprio noticed, but didn't pounce. His questions stayed even. Why no attorney with you today, Mr. Lockwood? He asked. Your family can certainly afford one. Jaden drew in a breath, squared his shoulders. I came alone because I don't need a handler, he said. Everybody thinks they can fix things for me. I can talk. I can handle a traffic ticket. It's cooler this way. The last sentence landed weaker than he seemed to expect. The room didn't see cool. They saw a young man trying very hard not to look like a boy whose father was blowing up his phone from somewhere in a glass tower. Caprio's gaze drifted to Jaden's left forearm. For a moment, when Jaden had turned to glance at the monitor, his sleeve had ridden up. A pale, jagged line ran along the inside of his arm, disappearing under the cuff. Not a scratch from carelessness. Not decorative ink. A scar, straight and purposeful. As if noticing the judge's attention, Jaden tugged the sleeve down quickly, fingers clamping around the fabric. How long have you hated courtrooms? Caprio asked quietly. Jaden blinked, thrown. What? You said your father knows you hate them. The judge's tone was still mild, but his eyes were sharper now. That usually doesn't come from a parking ticket. Jaden's gaze slid away. It's not important, he said. This isn't about my father. Everything about you is in front of me, Caprio replied. Including your father. Including that scar. The young man's hand tightened over his sleeve, knuckles whitening. It's nothing, he said, softer now. An accident. Old. The bravado in his voice had thinned. Even from the back rows, people could see the shift. No longer a prince walking through a room of peasants, but a young man fidgeting, heel tapping, thumb grazing the edge of his phone like a habit he couldn't break. He started to speak faster. Look, I showed up, didn't I? Without the entire Lockwood legal department. Isn't that what you people want? Responsibility? I'm here. Alone. Facing it. Standing here, Caprio said, is a start. Facing it is something else. The judge's tone wasn't cruel. It was steady, like a hand on the back of a chair you lean on when you're not sure you can stand by yourself. In the benches, a few older faces softened. They'd come in ready to dislike the rich man's son with his sharp tongue and perfect clothes. Now they saw the jitter in his leg, the way his eyes kept darting to the flipped phone, the way his fingers clung to that sleeve. The image of arrogance was still there, but cracks were beginning to show. Underneath the name, the penthouse, the money, there was something raw, a simmering frustration, a tiredness, and a quiet, gnawing fear that for all his privilege, he might still be one wrong sentence away from being thrown out of yet another room he didn't control. Caprio closed the personal questions gently, like a book he intended to revisit later, and returned to the file with a calm, surgical precision. "Let's come back to the incident itself," he said. "You went through a steady red. Explain that." Jaden let out a dry huff. "Judge, cars don't wait for lights anymore. You know that. Traffic systems are ancient, technology isn't." A few people scoffed. One man muttered, "Mine waits just fine." Before Caprio could respond, an officer stepped forward from the wall. "Your Honor, his model doesn't self-drive at intersections. It can't move on its own through a red. Not legally. Not mechanically." That sentence dropped into the room like a lead weight. The gallery reacted instantly. Whispers, sharp inhales, a little ripple of disbelief. Caprio didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Jaden, eyes narrowing slightly. "So we have a contradiction." "It's software," Jaden said quickly, shrugging. "Maybe it glitched. You want me to debug it?" His tone was light, but his foot tapped once under the podium, a brief tremor that betrayed him. Caprio lifted another sheet from the file. His brow tightened as he scanned it. "There are revisions to the citation documents," he said. "Edits. Notes. Someone outside the court added comments to official forms." He looked up. Jaden froze. "These additions," Caprio continued, "came from a private legal consultant. But this person is not an attorney. They're an employee of Lockwood Media Group." A wave of silence fell so abruptly it felt physical. Caprio leaned in just enough to show he expected an answer. "Why would a media corporation employee alter city documents on your behalf?" Jaden's mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. His facade didn't crack, it stalled, like an engine caught between gears. His eyes flicked toward his overturned phone, then back to the bench, and for the first time all morning, he looked unsure how to spin the moment. Before he could respond, a voice rose timidly from the back. "Your Honor?" The courtroom turned. A woman in her late 60s stood, clutching a purse to her chest. Her clothes were simple, neat, the kind worn by someone who lives carefully, modestly. "Yes, ma'am," Caprio said, easing his tone. I was there that day," she said. "On Brookside Avenue. I need to say something." Jaden's head whipped toward her, confusion and tension knotting his features. "Please approach," Caprio said. She walked slowly, steps small but determined. When she reached the front, she looked at Jaden only briefly, then quickly away, as if the memory itself startled her. "My granddaughter was crossing the street," she said softly. "We were a few steps behind her. And his car." She pointed at Jaden. "It didn't slow down. Not at all." A hush swept the room. "Not even a little," she whispered. "If she had been 1 second ahead, she wouldn't be here today." Jaden's face drained of color. No angry flush, no arrogance. Just a stark, stunned pallor. Even he hadn't expected this. Caprio studied him, voice low but firm. "You didn't mention a pedestrian." Jaden swallowed hard. I didn't see. Cars with advanced sensors," the judge interrupted gently, "tend to alert drivers when a child is in the crosswalk." Jaden's throat worked. For the first time, his hands left his pockets and gripped the podium. The gallery was silent, the kind of silence where you could hear the faint clicking of the courtroom clock and the shift of someone's shoe on the floorboards. The mask Jaden wore, carelessness, superiority, distance, was no longer slipping. It was breaking. And for the first time, every person in the room understood something that Jaden himself was only beginning to feel. This wasn't a rich kid's attitude problem. This was the edge of a truth he'd been trying desperately not to face. The courtroom stayed unnervingly still after the neighbor's first words. Caprio, hands folded, nodded gently. "Ma'am, please, tell us what else you witnessed." She drew in a trembling breath, but her voice, though soft, was steady as stone. "My granddaughter was right there, Judge," she said, pointing an invisible line across the bench. She froze. "But he—" Her gaze slid to Jaden. "He didn't." Jaden's head lifted sharply. A crack of fear flashed through the bravado. The woman continued. "I saw his face through the windshield. Clear as day." She hesitated, swallowing. And he was smiling, like it was amusing. A stunned wave spread through the room. Someone whispered, "My God." Others murmured, shuffling in their seats. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. "That's not," Jaden began, but his voice wavered, thinning mid-sentence. "I wasn't, she's mistaken." But even he didn't sound convinced. Before Caprio could speak, an officer moved forward with a slow, deliberate step. "Your Honor," he said, "if I may." Caprio gestured for him to proceed. The officer cleared his throat. "I wasn't planning to bring this up unless it was needed, but there's more to his behavior that morning." Jaden stiffened, fingers curling against the podium. The officer continued. "When we stopped him after the incident, he referred to us, me and my partner, as background extras, like we were props in his day." The room erupted, this time not in whispers, but in outrage. Someone near the front stood abruptly. "He said what?" A woman let out a sharp, disgusted exhale. Another muttered, "Unbelievable." One man shook his head and walked out entirely, the door hissing shut behind him. Caprio tapped his gavel once, not loudly, not angrily, just enough to steady the air. His calm now felt more dangerous than raised voices. It was the quiet before the pivot. He turned toward Jaden with a gaze that had sharpened considerably. "Young man," he said, his tone low and resonant. "Do you understand where you are?" Jaden scoffed, but the sound didn't land. "Yeah." In a room full of people who hate the rich. A few gasps, a few groans. Even Jaden seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. Caprio didn't blink. "No," he said slowly. "You're in a room full of people who fear what you could have become." The words hit the courtroom with the force of a dropped weight. Jaden's face froze, then faltered. His throat bobbed. His eyes darted across the gallery, meeting the stares of ordinary people whose lives looked nothing like his. For the first time, he really saw them. He inhaled sharply, but it wasn't confidence this time. It was panic trying to disguise itself. His arms, once locked in arrogant stillness, shifted. One hand rubbed the back of the other. His foot tapped unconsciously. His shoulders curled inward, losing height with every breath. And something else changed. The air thickened, heavy and electric. No one whispered now. No one moved. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter. Jaden's gaze dropped, then lifted, unfocused, as if he couldn't quite anchor himself. It wasn't remorse yet. It wasn't guilt. It was something earlier, rawer. The realization that the room he'd mocked wasn't playing a game with him. That this moment wasn't about wealth or image or bravado. It was about what he had nearly done. To a child. To strangers he'd dismissed as extras. To a city he didn't think he belonged to. And as Caprio watched him, not with anger, but with a grave, almost paternal disappointment, Jaden finally lost the last of the mask he'd walked in wearing. This was the moment he could no longer outrun. The point of no return. The air felt heavier as Caprio lifted his hand toward the technician. "Let's bring the video up," he said. A large monitor flickered to life. People leaned forward instinctively, bracing themselves. Jaden stared at the screen with the rigid stillness of someone watching his own reflection distort into something he no longer recognized. The footage began. A clear residential street. Morning sunlight. A girl stepping off the curb, holding a backpack strap with both hands. Then, Jaden's car cut into the frame at a violent angle, tires screeching just enough to make the camera vibrate. The girl jerked back, stumbling into her grandmother's arms. But the detail that froze the room wasn't the near miss. It was the view through the windshield. Jaden had one hand on the wheel. The other held his phone up, front-facing camera on, recording himself. And over the footage, faint but undeniable, came the audio, the tail end of a sentence he'd recorded for Instagram. "When you own the road." Gasps broke across the benches. A collective shudder, half fury, half disbelief. Someone whispered, "Good Lord." Another said flatly, "That could have been a funeral." Jaden's skin went a sickly, washed-out shade. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard enough the sound carried. Caprio nodded once to the technician. The video paused with Jaden's phone still raised, his own reflection frozen in mid-smirk. "Mr. Lockwood," the judge said quietly, "were you aware this existed?" Jaden didn't answer. His throat moved, but no words came. Caprio reached for a folder, thicker, heavier than the citation packet. He slipped out a sheet with clean corporate letterhead and a series of handwritten notes in the margins. "This," he said, "is a document sent to the city by a consultant from your father's corporation." "A consultant who?" as we established, is not an attorney. Jaden's eyes dropped to the floor as if dragged by gravity. Caprio read aloud one of the handwritten lines. Minimize liability. Father will cover fine. A wave of disgust swept the room. Someone muttered, of course he would. Another sighed. Money solves everything, except character. Caprio lowered the page. Did you know your father attempted to erase this incident? A long, brittle pause. Jaden finally spoke, voice rough, barely audible. He always does. I never asked him to. The crack in his voice startled even him. His mask had shattered, leaving nothing but unsteady honesty beneath. The gallery fell quiet, not with rage now, but with something closer to realization. Caprio studied him. Then tell me, young man, do you want him to fix this too? The question landed like a weight dropped from a great height. Jaden didn't speak at once. He stared at the grain of the podium, breath shaky. The silence stretched. 1 second, then another, until the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the lights. Then, finally, no, a whisper, a confession, not defiant, tired. I'm tired of being someone he hides. It was not what anyone expected. Not the judge, not the gallery, certainly not Jaden himself. A shift rippled across the benches, anger softening into something gentler, older, more familiar. The kind of sympathy born from seeing, in an instant, the broken angles inside someone who'd spent years pretending to be whole. The grandmother who'd testified earlier unclenched her hands. A man who'd walked in shaking his head now leaned forward, eyes softened. Even the officer who'd spoken against Jaden straightened with a quieter, more contemplative posture. Caprio didn't move for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his tone was quieter than before, yet carried more weight than anything said all morning. Mr. Lockwood, he said, you nearly changed the course of a child's life. And your own. Not because you're evil, not because you're cruel, but because you've never been taught how to stand in a truth without someone cushioning the fall. Jaden blinked rapidly, eyes growing damp though he fought the reaction with every muscle in his jaw. In the silence that followed, the room no longer saw a spoiled air with a sharp tongue. They saw a young man shaking under years of pressure, privilege, and expectation. Someone who had been taught how to hide, but never how to face consequences or himself. And now, finally, everything was on the table. The lies, the arrogance, the near tragedy, the father's shadow. All the threads pulled tight into a moment that felt too quiet to breathe through. The truth, at last, stood alone, unprotected, unedited. And Jaden, for the first time in his life, didn't try to run from it. Caprio let the silence settle, not rushing it, letting the weight of the moment sink into every bench, every breath, every inch of the young man standing before him. When he finally spoke, his tone carried the calm gravity of someone who had guided thousands of people through the edges of themselves. Mr. Lockwood, he said, you insulted this court, you endangered a child, and you mocked the very idea of law. Jaden's chin lifted, barely, but this time not out of defiance, more like bracing. But, Caprio continued, I'm less concerned with the law you broke, and more concerned with the man you are becoming. The words hit deeper than any raised voice could have. Jaden's eyes flicked up, meeting the judge's gaze without the usual shield of boredom or bravado. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was listening. Caprio leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the bench. You've been living behind walls built of money, influence, and avoidance. None of those walls protected that little girl, and none of them are going to protect you from yourself. A tight breath left Jaden's lungs. His fingers curled around the podium, not to grip it in arrogance, but to steady himself. The judge closed the file with quiet finality. As for sentencing, he began. The gallery leaned in, expecting fines, maybe a license suspension, nothing that would touch a Lockwood heir. But instead, I am not fining you the standard amount, Caprio said. Money means nothing to you. A fine would not teach you a thing. It would be a receipt. A stir of surprise swept across the room. Instead, he continued, you will spend 30 days volunteering at the community center in the same neighborhood where you nearly harmed that child. Someone in the back murmured, that's justice. A few heads nodded. Even the grandmother who had testified earlier looked stunned, but approving. Jaden blinked, slow and disoriented, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Caprio wasn't finished. And there is a second part to your sentence, he added, voice firm but not unkind. You will apologize to that child and her family. Publicly. Not on camera, not rehearsed, not curated for an audience. In your own words. Jaden swallowed hard. Not because you are forced to, Caprio continued, but because a decent man takes responsibility even when no one is watching. The courtroom fell into a long, profound stillness. No anger, no muttering, just quiet. Caprio nodded toward the grandmother. You may approach her now, he said. Jaden's breath hitched. His legs seemed unsure for a moment, as if moving toward accountability required muscles he had never used. But he stepped away from the podium and approached her, slow, hesitant, humbled. When he stopped in front of her, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, he said. I was stupid, careless, and I didn't see what I was doing to other people. I thought the world was something I owned. A shuddered breath. Thank you for stopping me before I destroyed my life without even realizing it. Her expression softened. The room held its breath. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. Nothing grand, just a simple gesture carrying decades of lived wisdom. Just be better, son, she said. Some people in the gallery wiped their eyes. Others looked away, moved in spite of themselves. Jaden stepped back, shoulders lowered, eyes red but unafraid. He did not look like the arrogant boy who had walked in earlier. He looked like someone standing at the doorway of becoming something else. Caprio gave his final words, steady and resonant, threading through the silence like a truth everyone needed to hear. The law is here to protect people, he said. But justice reminds us who we ought to be. He tapped his gavel once. And for a moment, no one moved. Because for the first time in his life, Jaden Lockwood had not rewritten the scene. He had finally lived it.